Hey, Nick from Playbook here. Hope everybody is doing great. I'm in a really dark little cafe here on day 8 of the Playbook project, so I apologize for that. You can't really see my face very good, although that's doesn't cause you to miss much. So today we're going to talk about one of the mistakes I've made in the past in building Harvest Profit. And Harvest Profit is our farm management software company that I started as a solo project and now has developed 400 to 500 customers, profitable, supporting 6 employees. And I really started it from scratch as a solo project. And so if you go back a few videos, you can hear about, the time and the mistakes I've made on things that are just immaterial, like logo design. That was a big time sink for me that really didn't have much ROI. My time would have been, there was dozens of hours I spent thinking about that. Even more would have been better spent thinking about other aspects of the business: customer development, product development, marketing. And another thing that I spent too much time on, but is a much more integral decision, is what programming language, what programming framework was I going to build Harvest Profit in. And so before I jump into what the tech stack of Harvest Profit is, which I'll get into here in a few minutes, I want to talk about just programming in general. So I got a Google Doc here open, and we're going to talk about um, just the components of what makes up a tech stack. And if we're thinking about programming languages specifically, we have backend, the backend language, and the front end language. And so to define the front end here a little bit more quick, you have HTML. HTML is the actual, what is on a website. This word insert here is, an example of HTML. Just basically the structure of the website, and then you have CSS, which is the styling of these components, and then the interactivity. So if I click on, this insert link here, these little interactive components, that is an example of JavaScript. So that's the front end, really simple. Don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. The back end is the back end frameworks and programming language basically communicates information from your database to the front end. So it's basically the connection layer, which brings things from the database to the browser or into your mobile app. It basically is the logic of taking data, transforming it, and putting it, exposing it to an external resource such as a website. And so here, I'm going to get a little bit more specific. We're going to focus on the back end and JavaScript for purposes of this video. And so I'm going to look at open source languages for back-end development. And so PHP, and this isn't an inclusive list. This is just a list of languages that I looked at. And so we have PHP, we have Python, Ruby, and this isn't a programming language, but Node.js is a back-end framework using JavaScript. And then the other thing that we're going to talk about is MVC, an MVC framework. So an MVC framework is a model, view, and controller. It's an architectural pattern that separates your backend language into 3 different components. And I won't get into too much of that, but you can do some research. We're going to look at MVC frameworks for backend development. And the ones that I looked at for PHP was Laravel. For Python was Django. And for Ruby was Rails. And so each one of these have their mature frameworks. They are set up for web development or building APIs that feed mobile apps. They're mature. They have communities that are supporting them. They have different plugins and different resources that basically pre-made components that you or your developers can leverage. And so those are the three that I considered. Once again, not an inclusive list, but a list that I was comfortable with after doing tons and tons and tons of research. If somebody would have just said, Nick, pick one of these three, spend an hour doing due diligence, and that should be enough research for you. That would have saved me. Did I spend hour? Holy cow! I spent a lot of time. So I spent a lot of unnecessary time. It was value added to the project, but really spent way too much. So now we're going to look at the front end, specifically JavaScript, the interactivity. One thing I should mention is a person doesn't need a heavy JavaScript framework. If you're in a website, let's say a blog, for instance, and you have a preview of blog posts, and then you have to view the full blog post, you click into the post, and it brings you to another URL. You can do a lot of that simple. It's called a CRUD app. Create, read, update, or delete. You can build a pretty extensive CRUD app using just one of these backend frameworks. And so what they would do is the HTML from your page would be the back end framework would spit out or provide the HTML for each page from your database. So that's called server rendered HTML. But for the purposes of the Harvest Profit, which is our previous product, and now Playbook, there's quite a bit of interactivity needed, quite a bit of JavaScript, and so we're not going to rely on just a back end rendered front end. So JavaScript, let's talk about that for a second. You can have just vanilla JavaScript, which basically means you just write standard JavaScript to do all the interactivity that you need. There's jQuery, which is I don't even know. Let's see what they say about jQuery. Sometimes I have a hard time explaining these things. So it's a JavaScript library, very mature. Some people will say it's, quote unquote, too old, but anyway, it's a very commonly used JavaScript library that allows you to add standard interactive functionality. There's another tool called Stimulus, which is created by the founders of Ruby on Rails. They thought some of the modern JavaScript frameworks were getting pretty heavy, getting pretty intensive, and frankly unnecessary. And so this Stimulus framework allows you to, quote unquote, sprinkle JavaScript onto your front end. And I'm sure there's a ton of different variations of these type of JavaScript frameworks. There's Backbone and Ember and tons and tons of different JavaScript frameworks. I focused on two that were kind of view only, so they weren't trying to do any back-end programming. They were basically just modern. What I had read was relatively developer-friendly languages, and that were frameworks for JavaScript and front-end development. And those two are Vue and React. Vue is kind of an independently supported, very popular JavaScript framework. React spun out of Facebook. I think it's still internally not necessarily spun out, but that's who launched the initial version of React. Vue and React are two very popular front-end frameworks right now. They've been around for multiple years. They're mature. There's a ton of different examples and tutorials and resources available for those. And so going back to Harvest Profit, which we built the first version of Harvest Profit using Ruby on Rails and using very little JavaScript or interactivity. And what we found is a lot of the calculations we were doing were too intensive to make a Rails rendered front end performant and be as snappy and as efficient as possible. And so we're doing more and more of our development in React. And really there's two main choices for that. the development team that's working on it likes working with React, and me not being a developer, if they feel like they're able to do good work, if they enjoy it, if they're productive, I let them make that decision. And then also we have Android and iOS React native mobile apps. And so we can, reuse some code, reuse some of the same concepts between the web app and the mobile app. And we're also going to do that with the Playbook project. And so we're going to use the same tech stack for Playbook, given that our team's comfortable with it. I found some good developers who specialize in both Ruby and Rails and React. And so that's really the tech stack we are using. It's all open source technology, free, big developer ecosystems, a lot of developers, a lot of reusable components that you can leverage. And so if you were to, and I'm probably missing quite a bit more on the JavaScript side of things, but if you were to pick one of these four frameworks, languages, for your backend development, and frankly, one of these two, I know there's a lot of other approaches to front end development out there, but I think you would be that would take you very far um, in your development. I guess I'm missing a big one here is Angular. I've just never had any experience with Angular, and so once again, I could probably sit here and name 5 or 10 more legitimate front end frameworks, but just wanted to give you a summary and overview of things that I thought of when planning out Harvest Profit. We made a little bit of a mistake by just using solely Ruby on Rails and not building a Java, not using one of these JavaScript frameworks up front. That cost us definitely quite a bit of refactoring there, and we're still doing that. But from the Playbook project, we're going to use the same tech stack. I'm very happy with it, and really not going to put a whole lot of thought into using performance, using different languages such as Go or Elixir are both two very performant, functional, very performant backend programming languages that have, frankly, better performance than a lot of than Ruby and Rails specifically. But for now, we're sticking with what we know, and until we find a need that we need to bring in a different, quote unquote, development recipe, we aren't going to add complexity. So, just wanted to share with you the thought process that we are using at Playbook to build out the MVP of our product. So hopefully you can get some value out of that. I didn't necessarily waste as much time on this decision as I did on my logo obsession, but I definitely spent way too much time thinking about it. I should have reached out to, some developers locally, some people that I was thinking about having build the app, and just ran with it from the start. I think I could have done a lot more marketing, a lot more customer and product development if I would have simplified that decision-making process. So that's it for day 8 in the Playbook project, where we are building a full software product and the supporting infrastructure, pricing, marketing, corporate contracts, everything. And so I just wanted to share with you my thoughts on selecting a development language and framework. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.